Again, welcome everyone. The talk was developed from a walking tour in the French Quarter that I was invited to develop. So it's different, and this talk might be a little different from other city Jewish tours, not highlight current synagogues and neighborhoods that Jews have lived in. Part of it is because it's walking and you would need a bus or something else for that kind of tour. Also, there's rarely been a specifically Jewish neighborhood in New Orleans. But also, for the first 100 years, the French Quarter was New Orleans. And for the next 50 years or so, it was still the predominant business center and thriving neighborhood. So a lot did happen there. And the goal of the tour and the talk is to show you the many ways Jews have been incorporated and involved in life in New Orleans. We start the tour at the Holocaust Memorial because I think that is a statement in itself, in that the city of New Orleans is relatively small as cities go. Greater New Orleans, 1.2 million, and Jews have never been more than 0.5%. Yet there is a beautiful memorial done by Connecticut artist Yaakov Agam. And this is the opening of the art. It is on the river, that's the backdrop, but starting with the Holocaust, these other pictures are the other images that you see as you walk through. And we can send you information that interprets those. But we're now going to move right into New Orleans, and this is what we do on the tour. We walk from this now into the French Quarter and start talking about New Orleans, which I often describe as the culturally richest city in North America. This is due to the large number of indigenous peoples who made it their home. Up to 40 different nations would converge on what we now call New Orleans for trade. They called it Bulbancha, land of riches. And then being governed by France and Spain as a colony, it got immigrants from many other places than an English colony or some other places in the New World, including from different areas of Africa. And by the time New Orleans is founded, Jews are living all over the world. So we get Jews coming from every place except sub-Saharan Africa as the people immigrate.
We found her. Just like in a real tour, sometimes you lose your guide. Got to find them.
I am not quite sure when I got lost here, but we are on the culturally richest city. That is because of the large numbers of peoples from so many countries with so many cultures that get blended into a Creole culture. Creole from the same word as creation in Latin, newborn, actual meaning, and always a mix of peoples, including Jews, because we know as Jews were dispersed throughout the world, that they ended up in places that people migrated to, New Orleans, everywhere except sub-Saharan. And how did Jews get into New Orleans? It's the same three waves of population that you will see in other parts of North America. The Sephardim, largely 1750 to 1850. Then there is the Central European Ashkenazim, which would be 1835 to 1860. and those Eastern European and Russian Ashkenazim 1880 into the 20th century. What's different in New Orleans is the Central Europeans were the largest group to come. And that means in New Orleans, the Jewish population has very, very deep roots. There are people with 5, 6, 7, even 8 generations of Jews making their home there. It makes it an integrated community within itself and with New Orleans, involved in all aspects of life, largely reform, as we see with the Temple Sinai photograph. So Jews coming by 1750 might not sound strange. Countries there, people are traveling, everyone's wanting to get somewhere else and set up business. It's a time of exploration. However, the French established Louisiana 1682 as a Catholic land. And the land was ruled by the Code Noir, the Black Code. The first one had only 9 articles, and they were largely related to regulating enslaved and those people who owned them. 1724 Code, which is what Louisiana was governed by, had grown to over 50 articles, and it covered much more. In both cases, the very first article is that Jews are not allowed. How about that? And nevertheless, Jews came and they were okay. The largest number were 5 Monsanto brothers, their wives, and children. The actual surprising fact is that Jews survived the Spanish period, which is 1762 to 1803. French, regardless of the law, had no problem with Jews there. The French chose what laws to follow when it suited them. Spanish, however, have a very different opinion of converts, and the Inquisition is still in effect. Jews are concerned. They don't trust new Christians because they have a concept of purity of blood. So, 1765, Governor O'Reilly, yes, he is a Spanish governor, comes to rule, and he surveys his area. He sees these Jewish merchants. We could go back, and some others, and decides to deport them. He deports Isaac Monsanto, who is the wealthiest of that family, and some others who are Protestant. The deportation order says they are being deported because of the nature of their business. O'Reilly's interest was in ensuring that trade would be Spanish. All these wealthy people's goods were confiscated and sent to the crown. You could be there if you didn't have enough money to matter. The next thing, though, is we don't know, I'm seeing a question, that deported probably to English lands nearby because the family did return very, very soon. There is a man here, Père Antoine. He arrived as Father Antonio de Sedella from Spain. He actually had orders to set up an inquisitorial court in New Orleans. That never happened. He angered his vicar, and he angered a later governor, Governor Miro. So Governor Miro deported him, probably to Cuba, and said, my job is to increase this colony, and I don't want my citizens molested. Antonio de Sedella returned. He did not start the Inquisition. He became the best loved priest in the territory and was thus given the French name of Père Antoine. Surviving Spain means we can move on to the 1800s and see what is going to happen. The slide you're going to see mentions the Battle of New Orleans. It's a watershed event for New Orleans and our country. But for New Orleans, it is a time when those Creoles and the new Anglos finally get together and work together. There are 15 single Jewish men in the town, and 10 of them participate in that battle to show how they are involved in life. In fact, they're in business, professions, brokerage, real estate, law, printing, hospitality, all that so early. And to see how this happened in a minute, we're going to go to the next slide. But I do want to point out this is the government building where authority was transferred from Spain to France to the United States in 20 days. For real estate, we're going to turn to Judah Toro. His name is usually associated in New Orleans with the Toro Medical Institution. And that is part of Tulane's medical school. He is Sfard. He came from Rhode Island. Family story. They made it from Spain or Portugal to Amsterdam, to Jamaica, to New York, and then Rhode Island. Judah worked for his father and then his uncle once his father died. He fell in love with his uncle's daughter. His uncle wasn't too happy. He forbade the marriage and he fired Judah. So Judah comes on down to New Orleans. Our only clue is he had been involved in some shipping in the Caribbean, so he was aware of the place. He's involved immediately in city affairs, including a commission to deal with the problem of sailors who get sick at sea, because no port wants them and the ship doesn't want them. So that was the beginning of the Toro Medical Institute. But he's doing brokerage. He's in the battle. After that, he's in town, 10 years, and he begins to make money in real estate. This is his building. It's a block long on what is Canal Street, the beginning of Canal becoming a commercial section. It includes the first non-Roman Catholic church in Louisiana, just territory. So in the Battle of New Orleans, he was injured, a very bad injury. It's a 9-pound, about this big, shot to his thigh. For a long time, it was a thought that Toro had no children. And everyone said, well, of course, we know the thigh is a euphemism. Of course, he didn't have children. No, he was injured in his thigh, and he did have a child. He just didn't marry. He did what a fair number of French men had been doing for 100 years, which is long-term relationship with free women of color. People of color is the terminology for those who were formerly enslaved or born to to a free woman. He had 3 such liaisons. The first included a daughter, Narcissa. The mother and daughter went back to Virginia and lived with his cousin, who he couldn't marry. Narcissa fell in love there, married, had 23 children. And from that, there are descendants, part of the Toro family foundation. Real quickly, just another Jew followed in this pattern, Daniel Warburg from Germany. He had at least 2 sons and a daughter with Marie Gros Blondeau. She was freed by him and then the children. The first son, Eugene, was a talented sculptor and artist, and the floor in the St. Louis Cathedral was designed by him. It's still there. So to continue with real estate, we're going to be looking at Lee, who had holdings in the Garden District and the neighborhood, and then town and then neighborhood of Carrollton. That's how things developed. And this is this great guy, Samuel Cone. So here's our exception. We got a Bohemian Jew coming in the early 1800s. He is described as a good-hearted, harebrained ne'er-do-well, fond of the tavern and the ladies, and fonder still of cards. One day he gets cheated out of everything. He's drunk and broke. He's embarrassed. He can't go home to mom. So he makes his way to Hamburg, works his way across the ocean, and in 1806 is part owner of a tavern. He's learned he's going to make the money off the drinkers and gamblers. As he continues to make money, he brings his younger brother Joachim to New Orleans. Joachim's son is Carl. So this family does a lot in real estate. They also are involved in commission brokerage and actually owning ships and cargoes on the Mississippi, in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and in Europe. So I mention this because why were people coming to New Orleans? It is part of the New World. But by 1830, it was the third largest and third richest city in the United States. The port was the second busiest port, only to New York, up until 1860. And the trade had changed. As a French or Spanish colony, the trade was getting things in and out to French or Spanish lands. Now we have trade going upriver. We have trade coming downriver. We have products from all over America going all over, no restrictions, French or Spanish. And it's a tremendous growth. The other growth is that starting in 1812, New Orleans was our country's slave market capital. So 500,000 immigrants enter New Orleans, 500,000 people are brought to New Orleans to be sold. And we're going to move on to a little more business. And we have another rare German, Samuel Hermann, who came from Germany to end up living in what's known as Louisiana's German coast, an area settled in the 1720s by Germans from what was then Alsace. They were then Germans. So he married a Catholic woman and probably inherited her plantation, and that began his wealth. But he became a very big businessman. To show how rich he was, this is his city home. And it's unusual because of the Federalist style, and it is in the French Quarter. So he was big enough as an industrialist, a cotton factor, to be one of the causes of the financial panic of 1837. Luckily, not all our business people were such failures, as we're about to see a number of them. Because going from peddling into merchants and other parts of business enterprise is a very typical story. So we've got here in the middle a man, Isidore Newman. He came here kind of late, 1853, and started to be a broker, couldn't make money that way, but rebounded and helped found the New Orleans Stock Exchange, later served as its president. He meanwhile had acquired goods through peddling or other means, and this was one of the largest department stores in New Orleans at its time, known as Maison Blanche. The other building here is the original Newman School, which he founded and established and located near the Jewish orphans' home. That is a famous orphans' home in our country, and he wanted to ensure that the orphans would get an education. So we're going to see now quickly going into other aspects. Many of the peddlers acquired old goods on their travels and ended up with many antique dealers in New Orleans. Being Jewish, the MS Rat was one of the best known. New Orleans had been the area had been very much an agricultural economy after the Civil War. There's some manufacturing starting. And so we see people moving there. This is Joe Haspel demonstrating the benefits of seersucker suits. So, and for those of you who've never been to the South, this is a seersucker suit. Um, Seersucker had been around for a long, long time. It comes from India. It was very, very cheap. And the Haspel brothers decided to upgrade it and make some more money from it. So they, according to them, invented the seersucker suit. And so we've got some other movements of peddlers, and we're going to see one more now, Leon Godshaw, with one other direction. Okay, Leon came very early. He arrived in 1835 from Alsace, when it is now French. And he turns 13 on the boat that brings him over. He's illiterate in all languages, but does have someone to stake him as a peddler. He goes out peddling and turns out to be quite successful, despite at one place in the town of Bonny he's chased away. Out of here. The town is reserved for whites. He keeps selling. He makes a lot of money, and most of his customers truly like and respect him. One woman even asked him to buy her plantation when she was in financial difficulty, but he was absolutely opposed to slavery, and he would not buy it. There's no way to free the people at that time period, would not buy it. After the Civil War, when she was in even worse financial trouble, now he had refinanced her so she'd stay in business. He then bought it. And he bought and bought and bought. He bought Bonnie Carey, named the town Reserve. It was his company town because he owned 30,000 acres of sugar and is Louisiana's sugar king. So, an unusual Jew in huge sugar lands, but that's not his only royal title. 1872 is the beginning of modern Mardi Gras, the first Rex parade. The king of Rex is king of Carnival. By the way, there are two Jewish crews during Carnival, but that's another story. And at this first one, Leon is the only Jew invited to be part of the crew, the social club that puts everything together. And he is not just to be a member, he is going to be in the king's entourage as a duke. Dukes can choose their duchies. Humble, you know? He just says, I'm the Duke of clothing. And so that's this wonderful man. These are doubloons that can be pants out or thrown during Mardi Gras, and they have his picture. It was one year one of the crews did that. So, as an owner of Sugarland, he is our introduction to the next couple of people, and they are also involved with sugar. Now, sugar remains an important agricultural product to this day. It started in Louisiana in the mid 1790s when one plantation owner hired an expert to show his enslaved workers how to granulate sugar. It's a difficult manual process. And that is the same time period when the French colony of Saint-Domingue was undergoing its revolution and will be named, actually renamed, Haiti. That land was producing 40% of the world's sugar. That market moved to New Orleans. So it's a big, big thing. So for the Delgados, Isaac, we're going to start with his uncle Samuel, who came to New Orleans first, 1850. from Jamaica. He was an experienced sugar broker, got right into the business. He helped found the New Orleans Sugar Exchange, well respected. His 14-year-old nephew at the time, Isaac, joined him and his sister and went into business with them. They expanded their business by acquiring a plantation's sugar mill. This is in 1885. Now, Samuel and his wife and his sister all died first, and all their money to Isaac, who had no heirs. Before folks died, or as soon as Isaac gave the equivalent of $5.5 million to establish the Delgado Memorial Building at Charity Hospital. Unfortunately, no longer there. He then worked with the governing body of City Park for the park to donate land, and he donated the equivalent of $3.5 million to build a museum, and he put in his family's art. It was known as the Isaac Delgado Museum of Art. In the 1930s, it was struggling. The city bailed it out and changed the name to the New Orleans Museum of Art, but it was the Delgado. His will provided for the construction and establishment of the Isaac Delgado Trade School. He left to the city that plantation's sugar mill with the proceeds of it and the residue of his estate to keep the school running. And it is today Delgado Community College. That's this one over here. This is the main campus. There's a number. And it's a lot of money coming from sugar and a lot of good done by it. So now we're going to look at one last sugar story and an inadvertent, perhaps, silver lining from one Jew who owned a sugar plantation. The picture right up here is going to show very, very small scale sugar processing. The main thing to know is that this is a very labor intensive process. It's very dangerous, working with boiling sap, very hot steam. Many enslaved workers were burned badly, scalded to death, in fact, maimed. And a man, free man of color, Norbert Rilot, invented an evaporative method of production. That is the basis of all modern forms of industrial evaporation to this very day. But he didn't have success selling it, perhaps because he's a free man of color. And then Judah Benjamin bought a sugar plantation. And his partner and he used Rilot's system. And it's Judah Benjamin who became the defender and supporter of the system. He wrote in a business journal, it was the best double refined sugar, better than the northern refineries. It reduces costs. They won prizes for their sugar, and Rilot then could sell his invention. So together, Judah Benjamin and Norbert Rilot saved hundreds of lives by having the switch to industrial sugar. Now, who is this guy, Judah Benjamin, other than a Jew who owned a plantation? Now, his reason for owning, and here we go with Belle Chase, this was he was married to a young French woman with a reputation and who liked to live in Paris. And it's thought that he bought Belle Chase just to entice her to stay near him. He only owned it 4 years. This was not what he wanted to do for a living. But they had been living here on Bourbon Street. It was not a strip joint back then, but a glorious home. So his history, the family is Sephard. They get to St. Croix and then Charleston. He comes to New Orleans to read law and become a lawyer. He is the most successful, highly paid lawyer in the state, elected to both houses of the Louisiana Congress and appointed to the US Senate. He's invited by two presidents to serve on the Supreme Court, turns them down, stays in the Senate until the Confederacy is established. And a few months later, Louisiana joins the Confederate States of America. He comes back and is appointed by President Jefferson Davis to three different cabinet positions. He is known as the brains of the Confederacy, or in less tolerant areas of the South, Mr. Davis's pet Jew. All right. You can see he was on the $2 bill. Now, the Civil War ends. Judah Benjamin is the only Confederate who had to flee our country to save his life. There is a reward going out for the Jew Benjamin, dead or alive, $40,000. So he does successfully make his way. It is an amazing story to get from Virginia to South Carolina to Florida. He undergoes three different disguises: a French journalist, a South Carolina farmer, and a Jewish cook. He finally gets on a ship of a blockade runner to try to get to Bimini and then the Bahamas, but the ship explodes. Gets on another ship. He makes it to Nassau and from there to Havana on a ship that catches fire. But finally, in August, he makes it to England, where he's penniless at 53 and has another extraordinarily successful career as a barrister and an amazing man. We have talked a lot about business. We're going to turn briefly now to religion. So until 1803, there was only one religion in Louisiana. We saw the first church that was Episcopalian. And now here are the first two synagogues. 1827, a New York businessman is coming down, doing business with New Orleanians, and discovers that the men there are quite unobservant and ignorant. And he finds this to be just not the way it should be. So he helps establish the first synagogue, which is Gates of Mercy, also known as the Portuguese synagogue. And the Portuguese synagogue allowed non-Jewish women to be buried in the cemetery and their children to serve in the minyan, or they wouldn't have had a minyan. 20 years pass, 1840s, we now have significant Ashkenazim. They do not want to pray in a Portuguese style. They don't want these rules. And now the man who saved Judah Toro goes to him and says, Judah, you have been so generous. It is time to give to your own. So Judah Toro takes the church at the end of that block on Bourbon, buys it, gives it to the Jews, and then builds a new church for the Episcopalians. Now, the church was meant to be for the new Ashkenazim, and their synagogue or their congregation was dispersed of Judah in his honor. But the Sephardim said, I like that building better. They went over there, and the Ashkenazim went on to Rampart Street, part of the French Quarter, and built this building. And neither are still there. The synagogues merged in 1870, and finally, they changed their name in the early 20th century to Toro Synagogue. So dating back to Gates of Mercy, it's the sixth chartered synagogue in the country. And because of Toro's contribution, there was a plaque in the building, and it has actually been not well, but preserved. And we get to see that. All righty. Now we're going to talk a little bit about medicine, because that is also a fairly common way for Jews to be involved wherever they are. But in New Orleans, it was really quite neat that it's the first female physician in the city and the state, Elizabeth D.A. Cohen. She was married to Dr. Aaron Cohen, and their youngest child died of measles. She did not, she was just, I don't want this to happen to any other mother. What can I do? I can become a doctor. She went to Philadelphia. Her husband's down there in New Orleans because there's only two schools that will teach women to be doctors. She graduates fifth in her class, 1857, and comes on down to New Orleans. Now, she lives a long time. And in 1920, on an interview, she talked about the importance of education for women and said, it'll be better when women can vote and can protect their own property and their own children. Even if I'm 100, I'm for votes for women. Yeah. So not just medicine, we also in New Orleans have a long history of apothecary and pharmacy. And in 1905, pharmacist Gus Katz and businessman Sidney Besthoff started a Katz and Besthoff drugstore through an accident of shipping the wrong wrapping paper. K&B purple became their purple, their color. Throughout the city, everyone knew K&B purple. People still identify this color as K&B purple. They had all their own private label items, garbage cans, whatever, all in purple. Their own liquor line, their own K&B ice cream, fucking ice cream freezer display case, fabulous stores, 184 of them. They're not there because they were sold to the Rite Aid Corporation. Mr. Besthoff, in 1963, a descendant, represented the National Association of Chain Drugstores at a White House conference that helped plan what became the Civil Rights Bill. At that time, he was in a group of local leaders trying to integrate their food service counters. So that's a great thing to know, other than being a good businessman. And again, as someone with a lot of money and wanting to give back to his city, we're going to see that Sidney and Walda Besthoff, and this is Sidney Besthoff, it's the third generation, donated a sculpture garden that rings the New Orleans Museum of Art. So we've got medicine, art, that liquor. Come on, that's what people go to New Orleans looking for that. And the city's official drink, voted by the state legislature, is the Sazerac cocktail. And here it is in its glory. This is the Sazerac house. So that house has been established by the Sazerac Liquor Company, which is owned by Stephen Goldring. Its genesis is with Malcolm Woldenberg, a Canadian who worked for Seagram's in the US and met Newman Goldring. They became partners, moved to New Orleans, and established a wholesale liquor business that has truly developed. So what is Sazerac? It is first and foremost the name of a family. In France, they are vintners. They make wine and cognac for the last 400 or 500 years. It was the Sazerac brand of cognac that was mixed with apothecary Peychaud's bitters. So Peychaud's bitters, Sazerac cognac, and a little sugar That was the original cocktail. The Sazerac Liquor Company does own Peychaud's Bitters, closely kept secret, and is in a wonderful relationship still with the Sazerac family in France. The building there is a wonderful museum type of establishment devoted to cocktail culture and liquor in New Orleans. It's free and fun. So the Woldenbergs and Goldrings were great philanthropists. And after Malcolm died, his son chose not to stay in the business. And everything is held by Goldring, both the business and foundation. They're very, very generous people, many Jewish charities. And here we have a lawn park, riverfront at New Orleans riverfront in honor of Malcolm Woldenberg. Right over here is the Holocaust Memorial. And behind it is the aquarium. Okay, so we got art, we got liquor. What's next in New Orleans? Maybe music? Do Jews have anything to do with jazz? They saved it in New Orleans. This building in 1950 was an art gallery owned by Larry Bornstein, and he wanted to hear jazz. There weren't many places playing jazz, having jazz musicians. Everyone wanted to hear bebop, rock and roll, swing. So he said, you want to play jazz? You want to learn jazz? You want to jam? I'll make room for you. 10 years later, Alan and Sandra Jaffe are in Mexico on their honeymoon. They decide, spur of the moment, let's just stop in New Orleans. They get there. Where's the best jazz? Where's the best jazz? Mr. Larry's. Walk in, love at first sound. 3 days later, they own the building, name it Preservation Hall, and it is still going on today. One of their sons, who's a tuba player, just like Alan. But the Jewish connection to jazz is a little bit older. And now we're going to talk about one of those Ashkenazic families who did live in a Jewish neighborhood. So 1880s, 90s, early 1900s, New Orleans does have housing segregation, largely by economy. So there is a poor neighborhood. These new Jews are very poor. Some Italians were very poor. Next door is a poor African-American community. And the Karnofskis have a junk and coal business. Morris hires, Lewis and Tilly, his parents, hired the young Louis Armstrong to work with their sons. Armstrong's mother is arrested and he has nowhere to go. There's like 9 kids in the Karnofsky family, and they said, what's one more? Come on over. So he moves in, and there's a number of things that develop from that, where the lullabies are sung in Russian and Yiddish. The first development is scat. Louis Armstrong said that's the beginning of scat, meaningless sounds set to music. He also said, it's the Jewish family who instilled in me singing from the heart. 3, he wore a Star of David around his neck his whole life. And 4, the family heard his talent. So Morris one day sees a used cornet in a pawn shop, and the family advances Louis $5, which is how he acquires his first cornet. Descendants own restaurants and bars on Bourbon Street, including the one named for this whole story. And so restaurants and bars, we talk about food. Another thing New Orleans is best known for. Now, one definition of Creole food is that it is the food that people bring to New Orleans because they want to eat what they're used to, but sometimes they have to use local ingredients instead of what they used to use at home. Originally, that was because those things from home weren't available. Praline in southern Louisiana is pecans. In France, almonds. So we have a Jewish Creole chef here, Alon Shaya, and his incomparable hummus. I'm seeing a chat. His restaurant was originally Shaya's, but that has been bought by his partner. He has two, Saba, and then in Denver, Safta. In both cases, they are Creole in the sense that he took the food of his beloved Bulgarian Israeli grandmother and added influences from the American South and local ingredients. So we're getting toward the end here. Oh, thank goodness. In the 20th century, the French Quarter, that original city, was threatened with destruction. And one way
We are almost at the end here, and it seems like Suzanne got lost once again. So we'll wait for her to return. And we just like to keep our virtual tours authentic to in-person ones, where yeah, thank you, David, for saying she just stepped into a bar again. She's I forget the name of the cocktail already, but I imagine that's not true, but I'll see if we can find her.
there, thank you.
Mm,
Thank you, thank you.
perfect.
So early 1920s, we are getting local artists and art lovers trying to revive arts in the French Quarter. And one of these is what is now known, we have an indoor picture, Le Petit Theater. It was originally the drawing room players, and they met at the Garden District home of Mrs. Abe Goldberg, Jews involved in the arts. Le Petit Salon is a salon of ladies who appreciate fine poetry, philosophy, literacy, music, and Mrs. Joseph Haspel, the man who was in the water, was a charter member. We're going to move on to some little bit quickly with some other arts in New Orleans. We are getting writers, artists, thespians, academics, all moving into New Orleans from around the country, as well as from uptown, which is often used to mean wealthy. So here we've got the Faulkner bookstore for an example of that. So the Double Dealer magazine was really important. It published folks like Hemingway, Faulkner, Robert Penn Warren, their first publications. And that was edited by Louis Freend and Albert Goldstein. So now we're going to talk really quickly about saving buildings, because that was also part of the revival. We have a man, William Irby, who saved the French Opera House. He also bought this historic building, made it his home, made the courtyard a home to Arts and Crafts Club. We don't know why this CEO of American Tobacco and chairman of the board at Tulane was interested in saving the French Quarter. Possibly to influenced by Tulane architects, and possibly his love of art. His contributions are also greatly seen in the actual Jackson Square, where there are 5 buildings. And he saved, first of all, the cathedral, which, like the Opera House, was badly damaged in 1915. And one of the two, there's the cathedral, one of the two Consalva buildings, a series of apartments and businesses, and then the back half of that cabildo. So For a long time, we've talked about Irby as Jewish. But when we look into it, we really can't prove that he is. And we know that he did not live a Jewish life. My research indicates that he had most likely a Jewish background, a mother or grandmother, and that due to this, some people may have treated him as a Jew in New Orleans, which is where the identification comes from, as opposed to good research that we can point to. And then the other side of the square, we have another of these, and this was saved by a consortium of Jewish men, Alfred Danziger, Jules Dreyfus, and William Runkle. They were all connected with Huey Long. And we are now going to say the end. Not really. One more slide to show you that the story continues. These are people and places there was no time for. Others may disagree, but I think New Orleans has more colorful characters per square foot than any other city in our country, and many of them are or were Jews. So what you're going to need to do, final slide, is visit New Orleans and book this tour, and you can learn a whole lot more. Sorry for my computer plunking out.
No worries. We made the best of it, and as I said, it's just more authentic to the real thing. We do have a few questions if we have some time. Great.
Okay.
So lots of folks were mentioning, Toro specifically. There are institutions that are named after him throughout the country, or potentially named throughout the country. Is that
Toro, the Toro Synagogue in Rhode Island, same family.
Mm-hmm.
He
and then
came
I
here
think
from
there's
Rhode
also a
Island.
Toro College in New York. So I'm curious
On
if
his death, he gave all his money to Jewish and Christian charities. And he was the largest contributor at that time to Jewish charities in Jerusalem. So there are many things that could have his name.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And someone mentioned a potential Jewish pirate named Jean Lafayette. Do you know anything about a Jewish pirate?
It's the picture on the previous slide.
Oh, I missed it.
There are
Okay.
historians who believe the Laffittes, that's John, right here, John Lafitte and his little flag, were Jewish, and there are reasons to believe they were not. So it's a longer story. I can put it in writing and have it sent out to folks.
Wonderful. And even more reason for folks to take a trip to New Orleans and learn more. I believe we are at time. In the follow-up email that you will all receive, we will include details about Suzanne. We will include the recording, and we may just include a story about a potentially Jewish pirate. So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much. You made me so happy today.
Thank you, Suzanne. This was really wonderful. Thank you. Getting
Thank
lots
you.
of hearts. Bye-bye for now.